3 hours. 180 minutes. What can you do in 3 hours? Watch a football game. Could fly from New York to London on the Concorde. Could drive to Wisconsin Dells. You could do your laundry. You could watch a couple of movies. Put together a jigsaw puzzle. It doesn't seem like much, those 3 hours, but when you're Jesus, 3 hours is the rest of your life. When you're Jesus and they've marched you up the slopes of Calvary and stripped you naked and nailed you to a cross, and you hang beneath the midday sun while your skin turns clammy and your heart beats a ragged, racing rhythm as shock sets in. When you hang there with arms spread wide and mocking welcome to the swarms of bugs that have already gathered to feed. The muscles in your arms and your shoulders and your chest are cramping endlessly. And the spasms keep you from sinking into that twilight dissociative state that sometimes helps those who are dying. When life has just become pain, endless pain without any break. To you, 3 hours are an eternity. Why? Why this kind of death? If the point of Jesus dying for our sins was just simply that, to die, why did it have to be this way? Why not a spear to the chest or a knife in the back? Even a good old-fashioned stoning would have been less brutal. Why did they have to call upon the Romans to do this thing in their own unique way? A way that was calculated to inflict maximum pain for the maximum amount of time. And after all, Jewish law called for animal sacrifice to be done with some degree of humanity. Sacrificial lambs were not supposed to suffer at the hands of the priests, and if it was as simple, and you have to put quotes around simple, but if it was as simple as a case of a sin offering, written large, then what was the point to such a brutal, soul-wrenching death? It's because Jesus, up to this point, he may have been born a human being, he may have had a human mother and a human foster father, stepfather, whatever you would call him, Joseph. And Jesus may have run the streets of Nazareth as a little boy, getting into trouble and skinning his knees. May have experienced heartbreak at the loss of loved ones, disappointment at the actions of his friends, but for all that, he had not yet experienced being human. I should say he had not yet experienced being fully human. Because what makes us uniquely human among all of God's creatures is not just being born of a woman. It's not our DNA. It's not the fact that we use tools or write sonnets or make jokes. It's the fact that we sin. We are born and we grow old and we die, anchored to this material world, this physical plane. We're anchored to it by our bodies. And by our souls, by those sparks of self-awareness deep inside that live in a state of sin. A state of sin which we know is a state of separation from God. You see, sin doesn't happen because we break God's law, but we break God's law as a manifestation of our sin, of our separateness, of our turning away from God. Remember, the law was put there as a mirror to show us our state. So with that in mind, Jesus, as a manifestation of divinity in human form, had one serious drawback. he could never be fully human. He could never fully understand the human experience since he could not know sin. So he could never experience the terrible apartness that comes from knowing that you've pushed God away, that you have made God subordinate to your own needs or wants. Or could he? If a man would not pull away from God, could you pull God away from the man? Could you break him so thoroughly by betrayal and by torture and by the calculated brutality of crucifixion? Could you destroy his trust in humanity? Could you rend his flesh and rack his bones and utterly crush him in such a way that even a manifestation of divinity, even somebody who had coexisted with God for uncounted ages before he allowed himself to be sent here, so that somebody like that could reach a low point in their suffering when they could reach out to God and feel nothing? A point where it would be obvious to him that God had abandoned him, had left him in the lurch. With a proper amount of suffering, then, and a calculated application of terror, could you break a man to the point where he would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" At 3 p.m, on a rocky hill just outside the city walls of Jerusalem, the answer to that question was yes. Yes, because it was at that moment that Jesus broke. It was at that moment that he could no longer feel God. That moment when he was apart from God and so was able to experience that division, that separation, the only way that he ever could, since he could not sin. So God had to be stripped away in his life so that he could feel the way that we feel. And he could feel how we feel when we look at the depths of our own sorrow, our own suffering. When we put our hands into the wound that is the God-shaped hole in our soul and know that it could never be healed without somehow finding our way back to God. Reverend Reckley, my old Lutheran minister when I was a kid, very scary man. I think he slept in his suit. I never saw him outside. And he used to say that that moment on the cross was when the full weight of all humanity's sin bore down on Jesus' shoulders. I think it was something that was less than that and more than that at the same time, because I don't think there was a kind of a mystical transference of sin, not that he could feel. I think instead it was the sudden, stunning, horrifying knowledge of what we feel as human beings. See, up to that point, he had felt everything else, all of the emotions and the needs and the wants, even the temptations. But it was at that moment that he became, at least that he knew what it was to be fully human. He cried out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Why have you forsaken me? And because Jesus asked that question, because he bore that full burden, we are now free to know the truth. For our deepest darkness, in our deepest darkness, there is a possibility of light. For our most grievous wounds, there is a hope for healing. For our worst offenses, there is an offer of forgiveness. For our deepest feelings of alienation, our worst fears of being lost and alone, there His love. And sometimes I wonder, my God, how could you love us so?